Okay, sorry. I don't know what happened there, but I messed it up. Anyways, so we were just talking about the cytoplasm. Now we're talking about the mitochondria. All right, so the mitochondria are the power plants in the cell, and they do a great deal of work. Basically, they take your energy from food, or they take the food, and they turn it into energy. And so it basically burns the carbohydrates, fats, that kind of thing, and it uses that for energy, and it produces ATP, which is the energy carrier of the cell, and so it carries energy all throughout your cells. And they have like an outer membrane, and an inner membrane. The outer membrane's kind of smooth, and it isn't as picky about what it lets in and out. The inner membrane is more like convoluted, like your brain, um, and so wrinkledy, and so it is a little bit more particular on what it actually does, and or what it lets in and out, and there. And so in between those two, or it's called the inner membrane space, and then in the core of the mitochondria, you've got the matrix, which I'm sure you've heard of. And then you've got mammal cells, which would be considered like animal cells. I mean, mammal people. Those are like between 1,000 to 2,000 mitochondria per cell. And depending upon how much it needs. So if the more active a cell is, the more mitochondria it has. So our heart muscle cells, cardiac muscle cells, have to have more mitochondria than any other cell in our body, because our heart is continually working and it needs to be supplied with energy continually. So we have more mitochondria in our cardiac muscle cells there than anything else. One of the major differences between plant and animal cells would be the presence of chloroplasts, which are like a mitochondria. Um, they're in the they're like little complex photosynthesis um, factories, is what I want to say there. And so if you think about the back to the factory illustration there, then you can think of the mitochondria being the energy source, what they're transferring energy as it's coming in, maybe to electricity or something along those lines there. And then you have ribosomes, which would be considered the protein factories. So they're making the protein. So it's just ribosomes would be like, mitochondria would be a certain type of organelle, and ribosomes would be another type of organelle. And it's basically making the protein there. And it's, we get protein from food. That's one of the reasons we need protein there from food. And you can see the ribosomes there in the book, and they're just making constantly proteins. A single cell might have tens of thousands of ribosomes in a single cell there. So they're generating power and making protein as well. We have to have protein in order to build and maintain our cells, and so these ribosomes are going to manufacture special proteins as needed there. All right, so I'm going to try to pause this. If I drop you again, just go to the next. All right, so next is the endoplasmic reticulum. Yeah, that's a great phrase, or two words there, right? So the endoplasmic reticulum is a membrane network, and it's all throughout. You can notice it on the bottom of page 459. It's all throughout the cell, just kind of like these little things. I don't know what else to say for that, but anyway, you can see what they kind of look like as far as their depiction of them there. And so the ribosomes, actually, that we talked about a minute ago, then the ribosomes will attach themselves to the endoplasmic reticulum, and they will send that protein through the endoplasmic reticulum, and then the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER, it will actually undergo several chemical modifications, the protein will, in the ER, and then it's shipped to the Golgi complex, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the ER is kind of the shipping center of the proteins. So if the ribosomes are manufacturing proteins, then the ER is shipping that all over the cell or maybe even outside of the cell, depending on what's needed. So there's two types of ER, endoplasmic reticulum. A rough ER, which is down close to the nucleus because it's manufacturing constantly all of these proteins. And so there's a lot more ER on there. So I'm sorry, a lot more ribosomes on the ER. And so that makes it look rough appearance. And they're close to the nucleus. The farther out that you get from the nucleus, then it has a smooth appearance, as you can kind of see down there on the bottom of page 459. Has a smooth appearance because it's actually going to be manufacturing less protein and some more fat molecules instead. And you would maybe have more of those in like on your liver or something where you need that there. So anyway, so you've got the ribosomes, the making the protein, and then the endoplasmic reticulum, that's the shipping center to a certain extent. It's going out, sending it out and modifying it to be able to go where it needs to go there. And then they're processed in that rough ER. They're transported to what we call the Golgi apparatus. All right. So the Golgi apparatus these are little shipping centers of the cell. Okay, so I know I keep reviewing a lot and going back over it, but I want you to make sure you're getting it. The ribosomes make the proteins, and they send it to the endoplasmic reticulum. Those are sending it basically to whatever that protein is, modifying it, and they're sending it to the Golgi apparatus. And that Golgi apparatus, or sometimes they'll say Golgi complex, that is basically this flattened membrane, kind of just like icing on a cupcake. The purpose of this is to receive the protein and then reconstruct it as needed, package it, label it, and send it off to where it needs. So it is the shipping center of the cell. The shipping center back to the factory idea there. It's shipping it out. It's the conveyor belts that are, packaging it, saying this one goes here, this one goes there, this one goes there, and they're sending it out. Now, some of it might be sent to other parts of the cell, and some of it might be sent outside of the cell. It depends on whatever is needed. And that's what's so amazing about our body is our body knows itself what it is needed. And so it's manufacturing that according to whatever is needed. And then it sends it out through vesicles. And these vesicles go into the microtubules that we talked about in the cytoskeleton. And then it can kind of go everywhere, all over the cell or outside of the cell, depending on whatever is needed there. Those are the main organelles of the cell, but there's a couple things that maybe not necessarily the main ones, but I want you to know a couple things about. The lysosome that you see on page 460 at the top of the page, this is basically the recycling center. So any proteins that aren't used properly or they're already used or maybe malfunctioning, whatever, and they're broken down by acid and put back into wherever it needs to go. And that would be the lysosome that does that. It's the recycling center of the cell. And then you have the vacuoles, which are the storage containers in the cell. If you look on page 460, I also put this similar on Microsoft Teams. And you'll notice there's a few differences in a plant cell and an animal cell. Number one, we already talked about the cell wall and the cell membrane are in the plant cell, just a cell membrane are in the animal cell. Also, the vacuole, which is the storage container or where it needs to store its food or energy, whatever you want to call it, it's in that vacuole there. So notice that the vacuole of the plant cell is large, and there's usually only one or two, and that's because it just has to store a large amount there. But down in the animal cell, you'll see the vacuole there. Let me see. Oh, yeah. It's kind of in the top left on figure 22.10. It's pointing from the top left there. And these just almost look like little balls or bubbles all throughout. And it's going to be a lot more vacuoles because it needs it to be all over the cell instead of just one big one like the plant cell has there. So they're much more numerous than what you would have in a plant cell there. And those are just a couple of the other types of organelles. And then you have on page 461. This is a great page because you can literally just look and say, okay, hold on, what did that do? What does it look like? Whatever, whatever. So it shows you the design. I'm not as worried about that because, I'm just not as worried about that. But the purpose, that's important. Each one of them, it talks about a purpose there. And you can kind of read over that and look at it there. If you want to go back through this video and take some notes, I'll review right at the end on some of the, like what I call them, to help you understand it. And then you have the nucleus there, all right? So one of the largest, most important parts of the cell would be the control center of the cell, which we call the nucleus. You can see those on page 460. The nucleus, the nucleolus, is the little orb that's inside of the nucleus there. And you can see those that's kind of towards the center of the cell there. So the control center of the cell is the nucleus. So the nucleus is the master control center of the cell. It has the DNA in it, which basically are the blueprints that tells it everything about the cell, all the characteristics that you have. And the DNA, short for deoxyribonucleic acid there, its program governs the construction and operation of the cell. So if you go back to the factory analogy, you think of this is like the office of the boss man would be considered the nucleus, and the boss man is the DNA, or the blueprints that the boss man uses, the manual that the boss man uses would be the idea there with the DNA. And around this, it's around the nucleus, it's going to be separated from the other things in the cytoplasm there in the cell by a nuclear envelope, and the nuclear envelope is going to let certain things in and out, mainly out. So it's got little nuclear pores that transport the larger molecules in and out of the nucleus. And then down even farther into the nucleus, you have the nucleolus, and you'll basically, that is where the ribosomes are assembled and then sent out so that they can make proteins. And the DNA is, of course, stored in there. Now, there's a little paragraph on page 463 that says DNA storage. Read that, grasp it. It talks about the human cell being about 4 to 6 feet of DNA total in our whole body, but yet and it's, if you would stretch it all out, like you'd take it all out and you'd stretch it all out, it would be about 1.5 inches long. But it's the diameter is only like a few 10,000ths of an inch in the nucleus, average nucleus. So, anyways, it's kind of cool to see how God designed the spool. And we'll talk about DNA in another chapter, a little bit more entailed there. But this is just cell structure. And so the nuclear membrane encapsulates all of that nucleus there. And then the proteins that are associated with the DNA and with the DNA there would be chromatin. And so anyways, just a few decades ago, much of what we're finding out about the cell, nobody even knew. So it's amazing to me that they can look down at these amazing microscopes and be able to study and really be able to figure out, and imagine what they may not have already figured out yet. Maybe you'll figure that out as well. So that is the cell. So just kind of review a little bit here. You might want to take some notes on the sections of the cell there. First of all, the cell membrane. It governs the cell as far as what enters and what comes in and out, and protection of the cell. It has those cytoskeleton, the microtubules inside of that. And then the organelles are all of what does the work of the cell, the little organs that do the work of the cell, like mitochondria, which are manufacturing the power for the cell, the power plant for the cell. The ribosomes, which are manufacturing proteins for the cell. The endoplasmic reticulum, which is a network that the ribosomes uses to send and to kind of modify the proteins. And then the Golgi apparatus, Golgi complex, that's the shipping center of the cell that's sending it out to wherever it needs to go. And then the lysosomes, the recycling center of the cell, and the vacuoles, the storage center of the cell, and then the nucleus, the master control unit of the cell, which has, of course, the DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. And so that is the basic inside of the cell. I know it's kind of complex, but hopefully we could break it down for you into some terms that are a little bit more little easier to understand. And that will be all for 22.2.